If you want to learn how to make Ghibli-style textures in Substance Painter, the latest course from the 3D coloring book was made for you. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to consider getting the course. Now let's get into this week's video.
Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the process behind my latest portfolio project, the Sealed Stash of Sethraliss. Hopefully, after watching this video, you can implement these findings yourself and become a better artist. I'll be going over how to manage your feedback, how to navigate the ugly phases of your project, and how to stay connected with communities that help you become a better artist. My name is Piguet, and this is my project. In my breakdown, I didn't see the value in providing a step-by-step tutorial. There are so many other great videos like that out there, even on this channel. I also didn't record my project when I was making it, so trying to go over that now wouldn't really be helpful to the topics I want to talk about. I will be going over things more in an abstract way to try to make it as applicable as possible to others as I can. I learned so many lessons from this project, and I'm excited to share them with you. So the reason I really wanted to make this video was because I wanted to talk about upgrading your art through self-reflection. I've just come to a conclusion of one of my most exciting projects, and one of the greatest things is learning from your failures and learning from what you've done. So it's time to self-reflect. So one of the many things that I've learned over my short time working in the 3D space is learning from your failures. So understanding why something failed, it really gives you an insight of what works and what doesn't work moving on. And this is probably applicable to a lot of different things, specifically in a stylized environment such as this Sealed Stash of Sethraliss that I worked on. If I knew why something was failing, then I'd be able to have a deeper understanding of whatever it was and ultimately learn from it and get better at it. And this isn't something that I only did in my art. I did this playing games, video games, board games, listening to music, in college, philosophy class, relationships, understanding why anything was failing, and like coming to your conclusions and then ultimately making decisions to have better experiences with all of those things. And this was kind of a mentality that I kept because I really wanted to just get better at everything that I was doing. And that's kind of how I just live my life day to day. So specifically about art, and the term art it's like an umbrella term that has so many factors playing into it. Even if we only focus on 3D, we're talking composition, form, values, colors, shape, language, proportions, lighting, effects, etc. All of these things, even have their own subcategories of what they are, and they also need attention so that you can create the most harmonistic product. And then on top of that, if you're working in a stylized environment, all of these rules are skewed toward whatever style you're trying to get at. So for me, it was all skewed toward the Blizzard style. And this is something that, I can look to the game for. I can ask, other artists that, like and try to imitate this style. I can always be asking them, is this closer to what something in World of Warcraft would be? And if they told me yes or no, I could always ask why. Like, if this was a failure, okay, why is it failing? To, keep the process going. So, luckily enough, I was able to take, the brushforge mentorship, and having an authority figure on the topic, someone who actually works for Blizzard and is working on World of Warcraft, the game, the style that I'm trying to, capture. He sped things up tremendously because I was able to show him something, and he was, he could give me the definitive answers like yes or no, and if it failed, this is why it failed, and this is what you should learn from it moving forward. And it was a great experience. So I just want to share all of this self-reflection and project breakdown with you all, because I think it'll really, if it doesn't help anybody, it's going to help me tremendously moving on into my next project. All right, so for this part, I would like to talk specifically about, the stylized process we've been talking about, stylized art. What is stylized art? How to define it and choose really what makes it stylized. So I'm going for World of Warcraft style. That is something that I've always loved to play. Growing up playing it, it was so exciting. So it's just always been a goal to really try to be able to replicate it in my own work, because the quality is amazing, and that's something I've always wanted to, try to do myself. So with stylized art, you have a lot of factors going into it. From the way I understand it, basically stylized art is just, realism, just slightly more exaggerated. And what's exaggerated, Grant? Well, pretty much everything. So for instance, this is a treasure chest, in case you couldn't tell. You have the base of it, and then you have the lid that would, ultimately open, hinges, and then you have the platform in which it sits on. And then you have all these auxiliary things that, don't ultimately tie into the chest, like its overall definition of what a treasure chest is, but they are there, for reasons that, I could break down and go into a lot of depth, but I'm gonna try to keep it concise to, this is a treasure chest, and that's like the #1 goal. So in stylized art, you really can get lost with like all the different proportions and the flair and the style. Like you can really lose the readability of your object in the style, and ultimately, like mixing proportions, you just really want to make your object more interesting, and add style in a constructive and smart way. So the style, I guess, with proportions would be making this bottom heavy, flaring out the bottoms so that it reads as from afar away as like a sturdy, solid chest that weighs a lot, or is heavy, or it's hard to move. And that's a good thing, because a heavy chest is a good chest. Like there's a lot of loot inside, or whatever. For the platform, it has this like line flaring out the bottom, making sure that's bottom heavy, making sure it's stable and solid. And these are things that are happening all around the Blizzard game. Like all of this stuff is from environment. It's just slightly tapered and a little bottom heavy, and it just makes it so much more chunky and Warcrafty. And I say Warcrafty because this is a style that's been all the way back since like 2007, 2006. So they've done an incredible job, and they just iterated on it, and clearly evolved it through the timeline. But yeah, learning that just mixing with the proportions, you can create the kind of style that you want before even adding color and textures and stuff like that. Another thing is with this Snakehead statue, I've never done any creature head before, and no, it doesn't look exactly like a snake head, because it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be a carving of stone to represent what a snake head might look like. So the snake head, however I textured it, I could texture it an amazing, like the best surface textures of whatever. But if the proportions aren't there, then it's really not going to matter. It's not going to really read as the Blizzard style. It might get close to it, but ultimately won't be that truly cohesive Blizzard style that we all know and love. So just this one proportion, I find it to be like the most easy to see, and then I can break down curvature of shapes, making sure things are keeping them dynamic, keeping them interesting, not really drawing any straight lines anywhere. And not only just goes for the chest, it goes for everything in the scene and in the game. So yeah, so that is the Blizzard style in a nutshell. And if you don't want to go for the World of Warcraft style, you need to be able to pretty much dictate, definitively what style you're going for, and then what makes that style really, stand apart from everything else. And ultimately, you still need to be able to read what your object that you're making. So if this, is a treasure chest, but in the end, you couldn't tell it's a treasure chest, or, you know, it was in between just a box or a treasure chest, then ultimately, you know, I took things maybe a little too far in certain areas and it doesn't read properly, and, you know, that's on me, and that's, you know, something I need to iterate on and, you know, push to, you know, get to the final product that, you know, ultimately reads as your piece. And that goes for everything. So specifically talking about, you know, points of pain points throughout the project, I definitely would say the Snakehead was the hardest thing for me to do. Not only have I never sculpted or modeled anything that has to do with creatures, I've never tried to make a statue out of it either. So an extra layer of difficulty definitely was a challenge. But, you know, I can look back and, you know, I learned so much through the techniques of just even getting to this result, but also the process of breaking it down and getting to where I was. So, yeah, the Snakehead was definitely the most uncomfortable part about the modeling phase. And even though it was like one of the most difficult parts for me, like technically, that doesn't mean like, you know, I gave up or chose something different. You know, I asked for feedback, I asked for help, and, you know, I received great feedback to the point where, you know, I was able to execute pretty much what I wanted. And, you know, that brings me to the next point of, you know, really breaking down, comprehending feedback, and the value of all of this stuff. Okay, now this is going to be all about the ugly phase. And if you've never heard of the ugly phase, well, here it is. This is a phase in your project that will try to discourage and humiliate and discredit every artistic instinct that you have in your body. If you ever had any hope to be an artist, this phase will make sure that you think you are never going to be an artist. And honestly, this is something that I never experienced before. You know, I was always a very positive, happy, outgoing person, but this project really showed me how important, like, just being positive and not being too hard on yourself, how important that is, even to artists, like especially artists actually. And it comes around, this phase, it comes around whenever you can see that your project is not what you thought it was going to look like at any given point. So I have a picture of my final render here. This is the pretty picture that I took with Sketchfab, you know, the final product after about 8.5 weeks. So let me just take you through memory lane of the screenshots that I have for my project. Okay, so this is the very first screenshot that I could find. I didn't document this entire thing, so this is all just like through the screenshots that I took, just kind of actively to show progress. Okay, so yeah, here we have the very first picture. This is before I had the Snakehead. I wanted to make sure I got everything down in it. You can see how my design changed a little bit throughout the entire thing. This is again when my proportions were not changed. This is the very first, like, I modeled everything out, and this was it. I was, you know, getting excited, and this was the first Snakehead, and honestly, this was the phase right here when I started seeing my progress versus other people's progress. And I was just like, oh no, I'm not ready for this. For some reason, in my head, there were so many voices saying, like, abort, abort. You do not deserve to be in here. You really need to get out. Save yourself from embarrassment. Just stop trying. You clearly are not meant to be an artist. And, you know, I never heard that before. I was like, holy shit, like, this is not good. Yeah, this is the... I was getting some big negative emotions coming through this. So yeah, this part right here, I added flat colors for the first time. I readjusted some So this was after like my first bit of feedback. So when was this screenshot taken? This was January 23rd, and this one is 29th. So 6 days of progress from here to here. Huge progress. I'm pretty sure this was like right after we got feedback. So I basically had an entire week to push all my feedback through. And I added flat colors, and honestly, comparing myself directly to my other classmates who were much better than me at pretty much every step of the way. But seeing my progress here, and I was just honestly floored about how much I didn't like it. You know, it's subjective whether it's good or bad. But personally, I did not like what I was seeing. Like, nothing about this. I was like, I can kind of see it, but also it kind of just looks like a kid who's learning how to do 3D for the first time. And yeah, it hurt for sure. It was a rude awakening. Having put so much effort into concepting and modeling this thing and putting UVs, just to realize my entire project was a huge waste of time. It wasn't, but that's what I was thinking in the moment. And it took a couple days to get over how hard I needed to work to make it not ugly. So at this point, January 29th, I was like, I have so much work that needs to get done, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it done. And like, you know, I was spiraling out of control, and I went to a pretty, you know, dark place. It was not great. And there are tons of great resources that go over and explain this phenomenon. But in the moment, it hurt. And this is a great time to ask for feedback. When you're like really down in the dumps, like so confused why you don't like it, like the worst. So it's okay not to like what you do, not to like what you make. But the problem is when you don't like what you make and then refuse to ask for help, or you can't see what's wrong. So then you just kind of either for me, I would just give up because I don't like the way it turned out, and I would just like chalk it up to bad design or, you know, stuff that I didn't really know what I was talking about. I just ultimately didn't like it, so I quit. And that's usually what happens to me. So asking for feedback is so important. But in the meantime, I went scouring over the internet to find out exactly why I felt this way about my project. And I stumbled across some awesome advice. It roughly said that if you are cringing at your art, then that means you are growing as an artist. So going from this person to this person, you're growing. And if you're looking back at like, you know, older posts that you posted on social media when you were younger and you cringe at it, it's because you're growing as a person. And art is the same thing. Also, growing is pain. Just like growing pains as a kid, physically, you have growing pains in learning. You know, your brain is a physical thing, and learning, you have to forge neurological pathing in your brain so it can be uncomfortable and painful. And they also went to say that the faster you learn, the more uncomfortable or the more severe the pain's going to be. And honestly, that really struck a chord for me in this project because I was doing so many new things. I was learning how to, you know, render stone for the first time, render crystal for the first time, render metal for the first time, and not only for the first time, learning them specifically in the Blizzard style. So there was just so many new things. Also modeling this snakehead, and like so many new things I was learning, and it takes time for your mind to commit that stuff to memory. And, you know, in the meantime, I was in a lot of mental pain. I was upset with why I could not make the snakehead. I was upset with why I could not render stone, metal, or crystal. And all of it took time and practice, and I hated practicing because I couldn't get to the result that I wanted eventually. Here are more iterations. Adding more detail because I thought adding detail would help. Ultimately, it made it worse. I was like, well, shit, this is looking worse. And then doing a paint over, adding more color. Then, right around here, I hit my stride of doing material studies. So, you know, I was upset that I couldn't do all these stuffs. So between the mental struggle of trying to learn at an accelerated rate and a project that I hated, I was spiraling out of control. And this is something I'd never experienced before. So I was really confused why I had been feeling this way. I felt as if I did not know enough about all of these things to really figure out all of it on my own. So I went back to asking questions and asked for more paint overs and asked for more paint overs and asked what I could be doing in my downtime to really improve what improve my project, because I just wasn't happy with it. I asked for paint overs on my material studies, specifically the stone, because I'd never tried to do it, and it apparently was the most complex material that I was doing on my chest. So I tried to really practice it before really putting it into my chest. And honestly, the more feedback I got, the more I could see what was holding me back. And that's when I was like, oh my God, it clicked in my head. That allowed me to finally get the confidence to push past, this obstacle of the ugly phase. What ended up happening was that I was able to start seeing the progress through the practice and through all the paint overs, and it boosted my confidence. Not seeing results immediately is something that always annoys me, but that isn't really how learning works. The only thing that fixed this phase was to just push through it. I had to push through it and keep, rendering and refining. And once I saw this phase right here, I was able to, actually render out the metal to, an appropriate level of polish. I got really excited, kept doing it, kept refining my process, iterations, keep going. And then finally at this phase, I pretty much tackled most of it except the crystals and the snakehead and the banner. And I was like, okay, I need to get the snakehead down. What do I do? So, yeah. Let's see. So one thing that, instead of trying to, waste time, banging my head against the wall, basically I said, okay, look, Jordan, I really don't know how to tackle this headpiece. Like, I tried rendering out the stone on the head and it's just not working. What do I do? And, I was like laying it all out there on the line, like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. And, he was like, just focus on the base. I'll help you out. I'll get you a nice paint over and I'll break it down for you. And it was super helpful. So I started working on different portions of the chest. Finally, he was able to give me enough feedback to where this was the first iteration of the head. I was really liking how it was rendering out. Things were starting to come together. This is when I first started adding, rendering out the crystal. More progress. Starting to add more elements. Pretty much finished with the chest. Yeah, but once I hit this phase, right around here, I pushed back. I finally got it on the headpiece, and things were looking really, really crisp. It brought back all the confidence. And honestly, looking back at that moment, I just felt so giddy. I felt so, motivated and excited to keep working. To where if I were to quit whenever I thought it looked ugly and there was no hope for me, right around here, I would have never passed that point, and I would have restarted all over again because I just didn't have it in me. So the only thing that really fixed this phase was just to push through it, keep working, keep practicing, and persevere. And in the end, it'll probably be worth it. That's all I can really say about it. And it's probably different for everyone, but this was my experience with the ugly phase. Okay, so this section I would like to talk about comprehending feedback, or really just trying to understand what's the point of feedback, if you get any, or why should you even want it as an artist. And honestly, I think every artist who is wanting to improve or seeking to get better in any way should truly just seek it out, not wait for someone to try to offer it to you. You need to be actively asking people, what are your thoughts on this? How differently could I do this? Or what do you think about it? How does it make you feel? It being purposeful in all of these questions. There's only so much an individual, you or me, can pick out in a single art piece, at literally any given time. Whether that be like the value of an object, the lighting in like the scene, the shapes that build it up, the proportions, color, all of the, points we talked about earlier that make up an art piece. And this is known as like someone's eye, artistic eye. And the development of someone's artistic eye is something that, is forged over their entire life. So what someone can see on any project, is going to be different than someone with a different amount of experience. And this becomes way more prevalent when getting feedback from a professional in your field versus a student still learning fundamentals. The feedback that I would get from Jordan would be, phenomenal, very purposeful, and very directed. Versus if I asked myself, like, hey, what do you think about this? Myself 3 years ago, what do you think about this grant? I'm still in college. Like, I don't know. It's cool. It looks like World of Warcraft. That's not very helpful, and not directed at all. So definitely, if you're asking people, make sure you ask a lot of people and vary in experience if you have the option. So yeah, and asking other artists what they think about the current project is helpful because it may help you work through tough design decisions. Whether that be choosing, a color palette, adjusting, tweaking proportions. And once you start working on anything, honestly, whatever it is, after a while, you'll stop really seeing intricacies of what you ultimately wanted to make. So for me, if I work on something for like, let's say 2 hours, I honestly will stop seeing it for what it is and just start seeing it for like, rectangles extruded, triangles, or squares extruded, cubes extruded, cones extruded, cylinders, a bunch of crap that isn't really what your object is going to be, or it's not what your object is. It's just I've been looking at it for so long, I really can't make heads or tails of what it is. So taking a break, after a while, you start to go blind. And this happens to me all the time. So taking breaks, definitely help. One thing that happens is you start to have like a pre-existing notion of whatever your project is in your mind. You're coming up with something, whether that be from your concept or you're just trying to flesh it out in 3D. You have, an idea of what it should look like in your mind. And, when you're doing something, you kind of subconsciously start adding or subtracting details that aren't actually there so that it conforms to your mental image. So that's why sometimes I would, be working on a project, say, for 5 hours in college, and I'd be like, oh man, this is looking sick. And I send it to, someone to give feedback. They'd be like, this doesn't look at all, or like, this is wrong. And then, on fresh eyes, it's like, oh wow, that's so obvious. But for me, after working on it so hard and like staring at the same area, it becomes really hard to see, your mistakes and stuff. So it just helps, periodically just ask what people think about your project to make sure that you're even still in the correct mind space and stuff like that. It was very helpful for me, whatever I worked on that day, sending it out to see what other people thought about it. My other classmates, Jordan, my friends from college, it's always helpful and refreshing to get more perspectives. It's very helpful. Okay, so, this also happened throughout this project several times. The first one was in the concepting phase. I knew I wanted it to use the Sethraliss architecture as reference, but, I was looking at it, looking at the reference, looking at my project, and, was I getting there? And the answer, no, not really. But, through feedback and readjusting several elements and paint overs, it slowly began to read a Sethraliss prop. I'm going to be going through, like, the iterations of my chest to show you guys, like, it's not always, it's not always pretty when you start. And that's why you definitely want to give feedback, for sure. So creating distance from your prop and sending it to a friend, professor, mentor, or even your mom allows you to get a different perspective. They might highlight things you are glossing over or forgetting. What I've come to learn is sometimes they're able to see what you can't. Or can't see what you are seeing, so it'll give them a unique perspective. And honestly, sometimes their insight, even if not meant to, you can interpret it as, however you want. And that can really lead you down, a different path that like might solve a lot of issues that you're having with like proportions or, composition and stuff. So it's just overall helpful. My point of this entire thing is feedback is so helpful. And, starting off, it was something I never really did, because I never wanted to show anybody, because I just wanted to show them like, hey, I started a project and this is my finished product. And that's not it's not a good idea. From experience, it's not a good idea. So yeah, Oh yeah, so the next point in which I was struggling was with proportions. So this is where I'm going to show you. So this was the original chest that I showed up the project. I modeled it just in a couple hours, trying to stick to my concept as close as possible. And, I was really just focusing on cutting and making sure I was getting everything, trying to mimic the concept as much as possible. But even then, going from 2D to 3D, some things just don't really work. So this is pretty much like me only copying, not really thinking about how it's being presented in 3D, and just going for the overall elements of capturing like the spaces here and the shapes on the sides here and here, the trimming here, making sure that it's what the concept is. And I achieved that, and I was like, oh wow, it's looking really good. But something that I forgot is like the transfer from 2D to 3D is really, sometimes it doesn't work, and it's your job as the 3D artist to really figure that out and come up with creative solutions for this situation. So, for the WoW aesthetic, you need something that's really bottom heavy and, exaggerated features. And honestly, this is kind of bland. Like this line right here compared to my final product, like this is just almost so straight, not much flair at the bottom. This arc is, reading as an arc, but overall there's not much, not many interesting things going on, and I'm not even getting to the topology yet. Obviously there are issues. But yeah, so, this was the next step in the iteration process, after paint overs and whatnot. So going from, this to this, there are massive improvements to, overall interest of the silhouette, overall interest of like surface detail, and filling up spaces as well. So ultimately, like, not a lot of this, these specific designs made it to the final product, but it is iteration. I was going through a couple ideas here and there of how I wanted to execute, like the snake's hood, taking some chances, getting feedback, getting input from other people to see what they had to say, because before it was just flat, and then adding like this tiered snake scale situation. I thought it was interesting. Ultimately, it didn't play out because, I learned that you can, take other methods of getting this exact feel with less effort and information. Because ultimately, it is low poly, hand painted, and this is just adding a lot of detail, a lot of information, a lot of polygons, where you didn't actually need to. So, in order to save space, I took a different route. But through iteration, failing, process, and that's fine. It's good to fail, because the faster you fail, the faster you learn and can get to your like ultimate product, and get to a good spot. But yeah, one thing that I wanted to add is like looking at this chest, I was like, okay, it's fine. But when I came back to the next day, I'm like, it's looking kind of weird, and I don't really know why. And it's because like obviously there is some flair here, and to an untrained eye, you're like, okay, this is super, super exaggerated to where like I don't really need to mess with it anymore. But honestly, this was like an in-between phase of what like a chest in real life would look like. Like obviously there wouldn't be, you know, a tapering. It would be flat and square, you know, just like a cube. It would be completely flat. You know, mine was way more, you know, tapered and stylized than just a regular cube. So, you know, I was doing good. But then after thinking about it, I'm like, it does kind of look awkward. But then finally getting the paint over and seeing that, like, you really need to taper and be bold with, you know, your proportions, because ultimately it makes a much more interesting silhouette, much more interesting shapes going on here versus what's going on over here. And honestly, I just couldn't see that with my, you know, current artistic eye at the time. You know, early in January, I was like, oh, that, you know, it's good enough. But, you know, learning, refining my process, refining my eye, understanding the proportions and the importance of all of it, you know, it made sense to me. So then now I was able to move on and keep all of this, retained all of this knowledge, moving on throughout the project. So I guess, you know, here are the iterations, and I guess when going through, you know, any process, even if you're not going for the WoW style, or if you are, making sure that you're constantly like reassessing, like, yeah, constantly assessing what you are creating and whether or not it's capturing, you know, the style or the motif or the race that you're trying to create or trying to mimic. And yeah, ultimately this is the final chest. This is the actual model that I took from my FBX that's in Sketchfab. So from here to here, you know, you have obvious major changes in like design and stuff. From here to here, you have differences in, you know, the top part, bottom part, relatively stay the same from this phase. And then from here to here, you have some retopology. Oh yeah, no, yeah, there is retopology. Yeah, I thought there was. So cleaning up, making sure that you're not having like unnecessary polygons, because it is low poly after all. Then iterations for the head. This is the most daunting. So this was the very first headpiece I made, and I'm just doing the top part because the bottom part's pretty simple, but the top part is what I really struggled with. So I went from here to this one. So just by creating polygon and, you know, kind of creating from the concept, and then, you know, iterating on this through feedback, through paint overs, I was able to refine it to this. This was stage 3. I was getting more and more, you know, comfortable with it. Obviously, there were still some problems. One thing that I tend to see throughout this entire thing is the gremlins. I just kept seeing this as the gremlin head, and I couldn't shake it. And ultimately, I arrived at this, and this is the model from the Sketchfab project. Just the top part of the head. Yeah, the big differences, and it's all through feedback and iterations, making sure that constantly reassessing stuff like that. And honestly, this is just throughout the entire project. These are the two main points that I wanted to highlight, but it's just the same process over and over and over again. Yeah, so okay, so this part is about community engagement. Something that honestly has always been a problem for me, and I still struggle with it, is staying connected and engaged with your community. And, you know, every artist has a community, but some are definitely way more productive than others. The powers of being in a like-minded community is just so underrated. Just joining a Discord where I was able to meet artists and share the same passion for hand-painted art was so encouraging. Like, honestly, the Hand Painters Guild has been a hub for inspiration. Yeah, huge. Shout out to them. I'm pretty sure I found out about the Hand Painters Guild through a video through Stylized Station that led me to this Discord, and now full circle shouting out Hand Painters Guild again. I've gotten so much help over there. Feedback has been incredible. There are some top-notch artists over there. Some in the industry, some still, students finding their way, and then of course hobbyists, etc. And basically anybody can join. They have some incredible stuff over there. Articles about breakdown of everything. Honestly, the most helpful thing is just the fact that there are people there willing to help you out. And they have a job board. They're posting stuff all the time. It's very active. Would 100% recommend this. And even if you're thinking about getting into this, just joining it and being around creative people and seeing other people's work is just a great way to be inspired and stuff like that. And these communities, they serve multiple purposes, and there's more than the Hand Painters Guild out there. I'm a part of a couple art discords. But honestly, the main purpose for joining for me was just to learn. Like, I found this reference, this recommendation, and it's just been so nice to learn from all of these. Here's the job board. All of these different artists in here. Like, all of these people are doing something or asking questions or having problems, technical difficulties. All of these people are, working on something. And, it's so cool to see the process and the breakdown, their tips, their reflection, and, what they're learning from their projects. And it's just, it's so nice just being around these people and learning and stuff. And just learn everything. Learn whatever you want to learn about. Just learning. It's so nice. Learning from professionals, learning from, hobbyists, learning from students, learning like just as much as you can. And, you can always learn something from everything. And, it's very, very beneficial to learn. And the next, and honestly, the most just equally important aspect of being in an active community is making friends or networking or making contacts. No one likes working with toxic people, so you should be nice. Like, just as a rule of thumb for you as a person, be nice. And you need people for feedback. You need people for inspiration. You need people to learn. And you will never be successful in a bubble. So the faster you learn to share and be engaged in a healthy community, the faster you will progress to become a better artist. And it took me a while to get there, but now that I've realized it, it just makes so much more sense. Yes, the industry is a competitive field. And yes, you could potentially be going up against these exact people for a job. And yes, you're probably comparing your art to them, but that doesn't mean that they're your enemy. By no means are they your enemy. As a competitive person, myself, growing up playing sports, video games, all this stuff, competitiveness was, a part of me. And I went through college always making sure I was striving to be the top of my class for the sake of being the best at anything. I worked in the food court at my college, and yeah, I made damn sure I was the best buffet attendant at my college. And competitiveness can be a healthy thing. It can make people push themselves harder and ultimately get a better result. But at the same time, it's like a double-edged sword. It also can destroy you. These people you see online are just trying to learn, make friends, and get a job too. There's no need to ever ridicule them or try to put them down. I've heard that ego is one of the biggest downfalls in, specifically the art industry or like any industry. No one likes to work with people who they can't stand to work around. Specifically in my project, there was absolutely zero room for my ego or my pride. I was on a deadline, so when I needed help, I had to shed any sort of, pride or ego or anything like that, and I just had to ask for help. And I asked a lot, and coming across as someone who just wants to learn, that's always a good thing. And that's truly what I wanted to do. I took this class because I wanted to push myself to get better as an artist, to learn all of these tricks and techniques and all that stuff, because, ultimately I'm trying to get better as an artist. This is what I did in college, and, I look back on it now, and I want to get rid of it. I've recently removed some of my portfolio stuff before. This was a project that I did right out of college, and I see so many flaws with it now, and I'm working to get better and learning and just keep learning. My point is, you have to ask for help if you're stuck, and I got stuck a lot through this process, and no one's ever going to be upset that you want to learn and be better. Like, you should strive to get better, because the people who refuse to get better and think that they're already the best are the people that are never going to make it. And another thing that goes hand in hand with community is, if you are that person that is super positive, surrounding yourself with also more positive, helpful people is just going to spread that, positivity and happiness throughout the community. And there's always going to be someone a step ahead of you. You're never going to be the best. No one ever is the best. And you don't want to try to be pulling people down to your level. You always need to be asking how to get to theirs. Always being hungry to learn and refine your skills as an artist and a human being. That is why I surround myself with skilled artists and nice, fun people. There's so many studies about how to make your life better, and you should definitely look into it. So this part, I want to do some shout outs. Something that you always hear is knowledge is power, or not knowing is half the battle. And it's super cliche, but in this case, it was genuinely helpful. So I would just say knowledge is helpful. What I mean by knowledge is knowing the right things to be looking for or talking about. Knowing about resources that you can go to in order to find helpful resources about the thing you're trying to learn. And in this case, it's art. So things like Stylized Station is a great example. Like, having all of these different artists from all of these different backgrounds coming together in one forum, is super, super beneficial. And if you're wanting to get more into hand-painted art and looking to improve, then you should definitely join the Hand Painters Guild. They're all so helpful over there and are very nice. It's a great place to make friends. It's also a place where I learned about brushforge. Brushforge was ultimately the entire mentorship and kind of what made this whole project come to life. I've never even tried to do what I did if it wasn't for brushforge. So shout out to Jordan Powers' mentorship, Aeon Core brushforge mentorship. If you're interested in really getting better and honing your artistic ability, or just getting past the basics, and you're just wanting to improve as an artist, 110% would recommend this, hands down. I felt I was looking for a definitive path to follow because there were just too many pipelines, too many artists, too many styles, and content to try and make. And I always wanted to work for Blizzard eventually, so setting a goal to figure out how to make Blizzard quality assets was what made me apply for brushforge, to begin with. It was a great way to level up your artistic ability and work on a project with a Blizzard artist, and I could not recommend this more. Okay, for this part, I'm going to be going over pretty much, what I'm going to be doing differently in my next project. Major things that I came to realize during this project that I realized, were not the best things or slowed me down. So jumping in, this is the project that I worked on. Here are all the things I worked on the side. This is basically the pipeline was model, texture in Krita, here are my UVs, texturing, everything's hand painted, going back into Maya, and that was pretty much the pipeline. Block out, UV, texture, and then repeat the process hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. And initially, I thought of a pipeline, any pipeline, as pretty much a linear concept. Things moving forward / upward or whatever, progressing toward the result. So going back in the process and tweaking UVs, or like, modeling something out and then going to UVs and then adjusting the model, that's just not something that I really thought was productive. I thought it was like wrong because I was not taught like it's a very organic process. But it actually is an organic process, and through this, experience, I was able to figure out like it is fine to go back and, adjust things on the fly and like tweak the UVs, even when you have textures on them. And that was just a newbie mistake on my part. But it put a lot of pressure on, like, I had to get everything to 110% before even thinking about moving on to the next step. And in hindsight, it was complete nonsense. That's something that, I really regret, because I probably could have pushed this even further or added more stuff, in the given time, if I hadn't been so caught up on this, like, linear pipeline idea. So the next thing that I would definitely do better is planning. Planning is something that, for me, it's put to the side when my inspiration hits. So, I tend to get sucked into an idea that I never really get around to actually planning out the entire project, which isn't a bad thing, but you definitely can run into a moment later down the road where you can lose sight of your initial idea and ultimately end up, with something that's really not what you wanted / envisioned. So basically with this project, the only thing that I planned, like literally the only thing that I planned, was I wanted crystals to be in my design. And, that's not really a plan in my in my defense. It was more just like a want / I think this is cool, so let me just try to use it. And ultimately, I figured it out, but I could have had something so much more stronger, even from the beginning design phase, that if I actually planned it moving forward, I maybe could have come up with something a little bit more, stronger or bigger or more concise, to make sure everything was, packed, being able to be planned throughout. So yeah, my entire plan for this project was wanting to use the crystal in my chest. Other than that, it was entirely open for interpretation. That's not the best idea, since I had no boundaries. It was hard for me to design something that was a crystal first and a chest second. If I were to do this project over again, it would definitely be explore more options with chest structure and keep the materials as a secondary priority. Keeping this structured in the creative phase could have perhaps led to much more stronger design and more possibilities in general. Okay, so now moving on to one of the final points of this section, and it would be confidence. So, early on, seeing and being intimidated by my other classmates, honestly, was a huge factor. And that's something I fought with throughout almost the entire project, was confidence in myself. I viewed it as if I did not come up with 100% of my ideas, then I couldn't take credit for the project. Coming up with everything, thumbnail sketches, concepts, paint overs. If I didn't control 100% of this project, then the project wasn't mine. And that's not true. So asking for feedback or paint overs would just take away from my own creative ownership. In turn, this ate away at my confidence with being creative or having good ideas. This is a silly thing to entertain, because the people who you are asking are not doing the work. It's not their vision, and you don't have to take their feedback. It's ultimately my decision if the edits end up making it to the project or not. You have that creative decision if it's helping you through your, final product. And if you struggle with this the way I did, then I can say not a single person. So if you are struggling with this, and what kind of helped me break out of it, that if you use this argument for yourself, then everyone who's ever created art can't take credit for the projects themselves. So like, if you take any feedback at all throughout any of the process and you can't take credit, that means no one ever has created art without having influence or taking feedback from someone else. Even if like an artist might not seek feedback or input, but they still come up with a product, they're still being influenced by someone else's art, someone else's design, someone else's creativity. No matter how small or large, everyone is being influenced by someone else or something else. Usually it's an accumulation of several aspects. And this is getting into like the psychology behind the creative process, and I'm not really an expert by any means in this area, so I'm just going to leave it at that, to where like just because you're getting feedback does not mean that you lose any sort of creative freedom or creative power in yourself. So don't forget that.